Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Power Hungry Podcast. I'm Robert Bryce. On this podcast, we talk about energy, power, innovation, and politics. And we're going to talk a lot of politics today with my guest, with whom I'm newly acquainted, Sebastien Lai. He is the son of imprisoned pro-democracy leader Jimmy Lai. Seb, welcome to the Power Hungry Podcast.
Great seeing you, Robert. Thanks a lot for having me on your platform.
I met Seb, we met rather in August at the Steamboat Institute event in Colorado, and you were interviewed by a journalist there, and I thought how you spoke very eloquently about your dad, Jimmy Lai. But before we get to that, I warned you, I don't warn all of my guests. Guests on this podcast introduce themselves. So I've given a brief introduction for who you are, but imagine you've arrived somewhere, you don't know anyone, you have 60 seconds or so. Introduce yourself, please.
So I lead the campaign to free my father, Jimmy Lai. My father has been in prison in Hong Kong for the last almost 3 years now. And at 75, he's the oldest political prisoner. He used to be the publisher of the biggest newspaper in Hong Kong. It also happened to be a pro-democracy newspaper. So the authorities really didn't like that. And when the national security law came down, they took that as an opportunity to arrest him, and he's been detained ever since.
And the national security law was passed in Hong Kong. And now I'm new to this. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert, but I've been studying for this our discussion today. It was in 2020 that was enacted, and it was shortly after that. Now I'm just going to read this off really quickly, so people who are listening and new to this don't know your father, don't know your history. And thank you for that brief introduction. Jimmy Lai immigrated to Hong Kong as a young child, as a teenager. Is that right? Is it age 13, was it?
Yeah, he was about 11, 12, 12, around 12.
Born in Guangzhou, and then worked in a garment factory, then created the Giordano clothing line, made a lot of money, sold that business, got in the media business, founded Next Magazine, founded Apple Daily newspaper. Was first arrested in 2014, harassed by Chinese security. 2019, the protests in Hong Kong happened with the Umbrella Revolution. Protests grew to as many as 2 million people out of a city of 7 million. Jimmy was arrested again in 2020, released, arrested a few months later. 2021, his assets were frozen. He was sentenced to 13 months in prison in late 2021. In late 2022, he was sentenced to 5 years and 9 months in prison. I just wanted to give that quick update for people who aren't familiar, and I was not, and so I wanted to just get that timeline out there, because I think it's important to get that context. And there's this great quote from your dad. I'll just read this. This was in 2020, right before the national security law was put into place. Your father said, "I don't regret my support for the protest movement. I came here empty-handed." He's talking about Hong Kong. "And I owe everything I've got to the freedom of Hong Kong. Maybe it's time for me to give it back. I think there's more to life than money." He's a courageous guy, your dad. And now he's in prison. What have you been able to contact him at all? Tell me what is the current situation?
Yeah. So actually, just to add to the timeline, when he was arrested in August of 2020, he was let out, but then he was taken back in December that year, and he was held without bail, and so he's been held since end of December 2020, which again, highly unusual for a 75-year-old man, non-violent, with no prior criminal records, to be held without bail. So unfortunately, I haven't been able to go back to see my father because of how vague the national security law is, with laws such as with offenses such as colluding with foreign forces. Even doing a podcast like this and calling for my father's release can very well be a criminal charge against me. And as a result of that, I haven't been able to. I haven't returned to Hong Kong.
And he's being held in, as I read, Hong Kong's Stanley prison. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, it's a max security prison. It's quite it's quite heartbreaking. And actually, the images are available online if you type in Jimmy Lai arrest. But it's quite heartbreaking to see your father dragged around like he's some very dangerous prisoner when all he did was call the Hong Kong government and the Chinese government on their suppression of freedoms using his journalism.
And is he being held in solitary confinement?
Yeah, that's my understanding. That they Associated Press published pictures of him, and actually, it was the first time I saw my father in 3 years through those pictures, and that was what was in the article.
And when was the last time you saw him?
Last time I saw him was August 2020. I left. I left in August 2020. To be honest, not knowing that he would have been arrested 7 days afterwards. And once he got arrested, he was let out the first time, as I mentioned, and he told me not to go back to Hong Kong because I think he knew at that point that it was a completely different place, just with the passing of one law.
Do you remember the last words you had with him?
Last words I had with him. Last words I had with him. We always got along very well. It would have been something, along the lines of, I'll take care in Taiwan, and I'd call him even when I was in quarantine and whatnot.
So you spoke to him after you saw him in person, then before he was arrested.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so you were
extensively.
Yeah. Did you talk sports with him? I'm just curious. What were the things you'd talk about? Was that part of what my kids, we talk about basketball. We're all basketball fans. Is your dad a cricket fan, or I don't know what sports he followed? What would you talk about? Of course, politics were part of that, right?
Yeah, I'd say. Well, actually, surprisingly, not so much. But we wouldn't talk. It was. You see him in prison now. He's been in prison for the last 3 years. But so you think that it was the harassment started after national security law, but actually, the harassment that he's had is something that he's always had to deal with since he basically took his stand, for pro democracy, and eventually had to sell Giordano, his clothing brand, as a result of that. He's always had harassment. Our houses were firebombed, his emails were hacked. In Taiwan, someone skinned the dog and pinned it on our door. It was always my father always had this ability to compartmentalize. So we didn't actually talk that much about politics at home. Sports wise, I'd say a real passion was food.
Uh-huh.
I like to think that. To be honest, I think if Dad didn't have this mission in life, if he didn't have to come in the defense of freedom in Hong Kong, he would have probably been, happily been a food writer. In fact, he's got a night shift for writing about food in France. So he's a French knight of the agricultural order, which is something that is incredibly hard to get. He wasn't gunning for it or anything, but they just gave it to him in.
So he liked to cook. He liked to cook. Then, when you were a kid, he would cook for you. Then it was part of who he was.
Yeah, he would cook for us. Mainly eating there, I think.
Yeah,
mainly sitting at the other side of the table.
Yeah,
but he was a very good cook, and we have very good memories of Sunday. Obviously, he was always very busy, so it was Sunday lunches and that we'd sit together, and he'd cook something, and Mum would cook something, and so incredibly fond memories of that.
Yeah, that's good. I can see it in your face when you talk about him, about those memories come back. You can tell by people when they see those things in their mind's eye. Why was your dad such a threat? Why did China feel the need to? Now, your father was very outspoken, and the umbrella movement, he was out marching. And there's before I go further, if you haven't watch this film, The Hong Konger, which is a film that is made by the Acton Institute, is marvelous. And I've just finished watching it just now, and it's just remarkable, and has had over 30 million views on YouTube. It's brilliantly edited and put together. Watch that. It's on YouTube. It's also available on freejimmylai.com. So by all means, check those out. Why was your father such a threat, though? He was not just publishing Next Magazine and Apple Daily newspaper, which was the most popular newspaper in Hong Kong. He was actually out in the streets protesting. He was walking with the marchers and doing it regularly. Why would this? And I'm going to don't take it. He's an old man. Why was he such a threat to the Chinese system?
My father always had a very good line. That fear is the cheapest weapon that these autocratic regime have on you. Once they know that you're scared, you act predictably, and they control you. They have you leashed with their fear. And so I think my father was they really disliked my father because my father gave an alternative to the narrative of Hong Kong. That first of all, you didn't have to cow to the government to be financially successful. You didn't have to bow to China. Obviously, doing so would have been a sort of a opening to much greater wealth. Right. But he and the thing is, he realized that very early on when he first started Apple Daily. He called out Li Peng, the butcher in Beijing, in an article, calling him all sorts of horrible things. But to be honest, pretty accurate, because Li Peng was the one who gave the order to roll the students over in tanks and kill them in the Tiananmen Square massacre. Chinese weren't happy to be criticized, so they closed all the Apple Giordano shops in Beijing, and Dad knew that if he was, he had an opportunity to apologize and whatnot, and he knew that if he cowed, and if he had all these businesses in China with his apparel brand, that he'd always be in their pocket. So he decided to sell them. So he's a man who gave people an alternative to the narrative that you have to suck up China to be successful, and he also gave people a alternative that money isn't everything. It's I think his story really is that it's a man who has, it's a very clear man who, through his action, has shown that actually there are more important stuff than money.
He said that I'll read back what he said. If the government can induce fear in you, this is a direct quote, that's the easiest way to control you. There was something in the Hong Konger that was interesting, and I know his wife he was married twice to Teresa. Is that your mother?
So yeah, my mother, yeah, he remarried he was divorced once and then married my mother.
Okay. And your mother was Catholic, and then your father converted to Catholicism. He was baptized and became a Catholic. And that seemed, the way it was portrayed, and the Acton Institute is headed by Father Sirica. Yeah.
Sirica.
How important was that to his how important was his faith to his activism?
He took his stance after for pro-democracy really after Tiananmen Square, after the Tiananmen Square massacre.
Right.
That was when he decided that China was going to liberalize. He knew that China was going to liberalize economically, but it wasn't going to liberalize socially. So he decided that Hong Kong, being at that point a British colony, was going to get handed over in 1997 to China. And he knew that at that point, people would need a strong, independent voice that called the government out corruption, on whatever things that they did. And so that was what Apple Daily and Next Media was. So he converted actually at in 1997, a few months after the hangover. Well, actually, sorry, no, handover. Sorry, a few weeks actually after the handover, and it was because I think he always felt that he had a calling. That it was beyond. It was he always felt like he had a calling, like obviously he wasn't, as you mentioned, he wasn't born in Hong Kong. He was born in Guangzhou, and he didn't choose his home. He didn't choose where he was born, but Hong Kong welcomed him with open arms. So he always felt a calling to defend that place and its freedom. And I think all that just accumulated in his conversion to Catholicism after the handover, because he felt like there was a higher calling for him.
And he said something and I replayed it, gosh, I don't know, 4 or 5 times because it was so affecting. And now, so Tiananmen Square, the massacre was in 1989. He converts in 1997 after the handover. And I watched the film, but there was this segment I watched several times. He said, I'm quoting here directly, "I didn't feel anything about China until Tiananmen Square happened. All of a sudden, it was like my mother was calling in the darkness of the night." And then there's this long pause, and there's a look on his face. And again, I mentioned this before. He was seeing his mother again, and he appears on the verge of tears, and he says, "And my heart opened up." And that there was something in that moment of the aftermath of the massacre at Tiananmen Square that he saw his life in a different way. And there was a vision of his own mother that I guess he didn't see her again after he left Guangzhou. Then was that, or did you know her?
Yeah, no, I was very fortunate to have known my grandmother, but it's quite a well, it ends up being quite a happy story. But when the communists first came, because my grandmother could read and write, she was put in camps, and she was, dad's father had been very successful in business as well. So when the communists came, obviously they took everything, but they also put my grandmother in camp. So at a very early age, I think at 5, 6, my father had to fend for himself and make money to feed his two sisters. And actually, I heard stories about him having to, telling one of his sisters to not go with him, when he was like peddling sweets and whatnot, because he'd get beaten up because he was on someone else's street or whatever it is, and selling a product, and he was 5, 6, so they'll beat him up and tell him not to be there again. But when he decided to go to Hong Kong, my grandma was obviously originally she was very opposed to it. I think he decided when he was 9, and it took a few years to prepare, because she thought Hong Kong is not geographically far away, but it's a world away. It's a world away from communist China. And when he stilled himself and decided to leave, he tells me a story of my grandma hugging him and just crying. And he had never, I don't think he had ever seen her cry up until that point, because it was life was very hard. And I don't think sometimes it's just not, there's nothing left in for tears. And she was crying because she thought she'd never see him again. Now, fortunately, when China opened his borders, he got to see his mother again. But I think that feeling always stuck with him of going to Hong Kong at 12 and not really having anybody, and feeling that he needed to defend this place, that sort of almost adopted him.
So just a quick bit of background here. So your father was born in 1947. So he would have left China for Hong Kong in 1959 or so. That you said that they were able to see each other again after then he got to Hong Kong. But that image, though, it's one of the most affecting parts of the movie, The Hong Konger, where your father recalls that, and that Tiananmen Square was a turning point for him, and that was I guess in thinking about it, and I don't know your dad. It'd be great to meet him, but it was touching, right? That there seems like there are two conversion stories. One is the conversion that he had after Tiananmen Square. He converts to Catholicism, but then he's all in. Then he's fully committed. And then endures years of harassment by the Chinese security forces, and then until his ultimate arrest and now his detention. But I maybe I asked it before, but I want to ask, what is it that he represents that's so dangerous to the Chinese Communist Party? This idea, he had one other great line in the film where he talks about that Apple Daily was providing liberty. And, I'm a reporter, right? I've never had a real job. I've been, I believe in newspapers. I believe in the power of the press. And he had this ultimate faith in the idea of publishing and how powerful it was. And he understood that messaging. But how do you think about him in terms of what he represented, the threat that he represented?
Well, the thing is, it's like, the things he represents and the things that he is currently in prison for are actually things that the Hong Kong government would say it's perfectly legal. They'll say they still have free press. They'll say they still have free press,
right?
And then they'll send 500 police officers to raid Apple Daily. They'll tell you they still have free speech, freedom of assembly, and then Dad would get, I think it was 13 months of prison. One of the sentence was 13 months of prison for lighting a candle and saying a prayer at Tiananmen Square Vigil. So all these things that he is in prison for are things that the Hong Kong government say is legal. And I think in the end of the day, he's such a quote unquote threat because he represents I guess he represents the truth in this sense.
He was exposing the lie of the government, I guess, would be another.
Yeah, exactly. He was always there to call them out on their, on their lies.
And you're living in Taiwan now. And in Taipei?
In Taipei, yeah.
Okay, so forgive me, my geography is not very good, and I haven't looked at the map of Taiwan. And what do you do? How do you support yourself, Seb?
Oh, so I work. I work for the family office. We build houses here, and few investments.
So you're in business in Taipei.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And you have family there? Are you married? Are you a married guy? You have family there yourself?
Yeah. So I actually I got married late last. Well, actually, no. It's almost almost 1 year to this day.
Okay, Seb, let me just tell you, I've been married a long time. You need to know these things. You need to know your wedding anniversary. Just a little advice here from me.
Right, thank you.
It's just friendly. We're newly acquainted here, but it's a good thing to remember your wedding anniversry. This is I
do know. Yeah. It's soon. It's definitely soon. But it is a reminder. Thank you for that.
And what does your wife do? Do you mind me asking? What's her story? How did you meet?
So I met my wife, funnily enough, at a vegan restaurant in university, and we've been together for 9 years. And I'm not vegan, and so it was one of those things where someone recommended to me, and I just went there, and this girl sat opposite me, and started speaking to her, and we've been together ever since.
Oh, that's a great story. And where was this? In what town?
I went to the University of Hong Kong.
University of Hong Kong. Gotcha. Okay. So did you know? Back to your father's story, because I watched that one segment of the film where your father is almost moved to tears where he talks about his mother and that conversion moment about then he knew my heart opened up, he said, right? And did you know his mother? Did you meet your grandmother?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what was she like? And she would have been committed to the camps during the Mao's Cultural Revolution then in the late 40s and early 50s then, and hard labor in on the farm or something like that. She must have been an incredibly resilient person.
Yeah. And I think it was such a hard time that she never really talked about that time, but she was, and yeah, absolutely amazing woman because she's so incredibly strong. I mean, I relatives would tell me stories about how she had to like kneel on glass as
Say that
part of
again, please.
the relatives would tell me that she had to kneel on glass.
Kneel
Uh,
on glass.
yeah, as part of the quote unquote re-education camps.
Right.
I don't know what that educates you, and yeah, yeah, but it tells you the horrors of the Cultural Revolution as well. But she'd never talk about it, and she was always even through there was so much hardship that happened in our life, she was always incredibly kind, and she always smelled like it's funny these little things that you remember as a kid, but she always smelled like this Chinese medicinal oil that people would put on their bruises or whatever it is. Later on, I realized it's because she was smoking. she kept yeah. This is no endorsement of smoking, obviously, but she smoked until I think she was 97. Uh, um, and um, and I think every time she knew that I'd come visit, she'd put a bit of that oil to remove that smell. So it was this hilarious story of this woman who went through so much, but still didn't want her grandkids to know that. Didn't want to pass on this bad habits to her grandkids.
Right. So let's talk about China more generally, if you don't mind. And you're leading the effort to try and coerce the Chinese government now to take an action that would obviously something they don't want to do. They view your father, Jimmy Lai, as a threat. It's easier to keep him in prison, and were he to be let out, it would be a media sensation, right? There would be a lot of coverage. And it's remarkable in talking with people here in Austin. And I told, telling people I was going to talk to you, and I say, who Jimmy Lai is, and many of them don't. But I think if they knew these stories and they knew what the Chinese government is doing, they'd be appalled, right? Because we have our own issues with the press and free speech here in the US, but nothing like this. How do you view China more generally now? I mean, obviously this is a personal issue with your father in prison, but it seems Xi Jinping wouldn't be threatened by these kinds of things if he were really had a secure position in power. And I want to talk about the event last year where they removed Hu Jintao, but how do you see China now? Because there are a lot of people casting doubt on the future of China. There are issues around, obviously, a real estate bubble that it may be bursting. There are a lot of issues in China in terms of demographics. How do you, simple question. So how do you see China kind of generally now? Is China on the upswing? Is it on the downswing? How do you see the country in general?
So I'm obviously I have my own opinions, but I'm not an expert on Chinese politics or the economy.
Look, I'm no expert either here. We're just two guys talking on a podcast.
Yeah.
But you know something about this.
Well, so I know it through the context of Hong Kong,
Sure.
And I think that obviously they probably would not. They probably don't want to release my father, as you mentioned that. And well, if they wanted to, he'd be out of prison. But it's really in their best interest to release my father and other political prisoners. And obviously, I'm very biased because it's my father. But the reason why I say this is because Hong Kong is a source of it accounts for, I think, I don't know, something like 70% of the foreign direct investment into China. You might have to fact check me on that. But it was always a place where people could invest into China while having people from the West, well, actually anybody in the world could invest into China while having the protections of a common law system, a rule of law, And all these institutions that we have in America, whether that were instituted by the UK and Hong Kong, that we
Sure.
have in all the in many of the free world. I mean, we never had democracy in Hong Kong,
but the
we
legal
had
structure, the
these
legal structures
institutions.
were dependable. You had the rule of law,
Exactly.
the contracts, and the things that bankers and lawyers and accountants could all agree on, right? That there was a system that made it investable.
Yeah, yeah. So that system is now being destroyed. I mean, the one of the interesting things about my father's case is that it's not like the Hong Kong government has suddenly grown 300 IQ points per person. Right? It really is a conscious decision to destroy its own legal system in order to get to my father and the other political prisoners. I'll give an example. He got 5 years, 9 months for a lease violation. So it was a landlord-tenant dispute that they had to the case, because it was usually landlord-tenant dispute, even if he was guilty, which in this case, I'd say he wasn't. They'd say he is. It's solved by a fine. It's usually a simple it's an administrative issue. It's solved by a fine. I'm sure some of your listeners would have had a landlord-tenant dispute where they were the tenant, which is what this case was, and at worst you pay a fine and that's it. Now they flipped that into a fraud charge and gave him 5 years, 9 months for it. Now nobody had ever been charged for a landlord-tenant dispute up until that point, but it's quite a it's a very worrying proceeding, because this is a commercial charge. It basically means that the door is now open for them to criminalize, anything they want, really, and then flip that and turn it into very serious prison time.
So a simple commercial dispute, right, over is what they made a trumped up charge on a commercial legal dispute or a lease dispute, and then that ends up in prison time, and
exactly, and turns it into a criminal offense, which is absolutely crazy. The State Department has released a U.S. State Department on the day, calling the charges a sham charge. Issued a statement, and the EU Parliament has passed a resolution to ask my father to be free, and the UN Special Rapporteurs have called for his release as well. So it's an absolutely ridiculous charge. But the main point of that is that it's a common law legal system. Once that's done, once this precedent is set, it's a precedent, and it can happen to anyone. So going back to China, I think it's the calculus for them is really whether they are happy. And as you mentioned, everybody can see on the news that there's a lot of stuff happening in China at the moment to the economy. It is whether they are willing to sacrifice Hong Kong as a golden goose, just for obedience. I mean, just to stand down on its people,
to prove a point about authoritarianism or the power of Beijing, that we will tolerate no dissent
for a smaller world. I think that's what it is in the end of the day. Hong Kong is an international financial center, and by cracking down on it, you're by definition, you're making the world smaller. You're making ideas flow less, and also you're making money
and making China less investable or less attractive to foreign capital. So a quick station break. Again, my guest is Sebastien Lai. He's the son of the imprisoned pro-democracy leader Jimmy Lai. Go to jimmylai.com. Watch the film The Hong Konger, which was made by the Acton Institute. You can also find more and follow on Twitter at Support Jimmy Lai, just like it sounds. So at Support Jimmy Lai on Twitter. I wanted to talk about, because this is another bit of video that I've watched many times, and it's almost operatic the way it unfolds. And it was last October, in October of 2022, and it's in the Communist Party Congress in that massive building and all the red chairs and everybody's dressed the same. And Hu Jintao, who's the former premier, is escorted out. He was sitting, I think, next to Xi Jinping, and in the middle, in front of everyone, they come and two guys say, "You're leaving," and he's confused. He's an older man now, right? And he's bewildered by what's going on, and it is clear what's happening. And one of his colleagues wipes away a tear, it looks like, because of what they could see what's going on, right? He's being knifed in front of everyone without a knife, right? And he kind of leans over and says something to Xi Jinping as he's leaving, and Xi doesn't kind of acknowledge him at all. And it was a very public demonstration of a muscle flex, right, by Xi. I mean, that's the way it looks to me. I'm no Chinese, political expert, but did you watch that? What did you think about that? Because to me, it really seemed as a kind of a very clear message by Xi to the world that he could have done this anytime, anywhere, in the cover of darkness. No one would have seen it, but he did it in public, in a very public way. Why?
I saw the video as well. It's look, I mean, that's the thing. That's the thing with China at the moment. It really seems like it's one man at the wheel. So I don't know why. And again, like I mentioned, I don't. I'm not by no means an expert in Chinese politics. So I guess my reaction is the same as yours. It seems like a statement, and maybe it's a constant consolidation of power.
Well, that's kind of the read that a lot of people have, is that Xi is now consolidating his power. He's been in power since 2012, if memory serves. Is he the new Mao?
Again, I'm no Chinese. I'm no China expert.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Do you contact people in China? Do you have? I know you have deep roots in Hong Kong, but do you stay in touch with people in China?
I do not. I do not. Well, to be honest, even before, so Dad wasn't actually allowed in China because of his pro-democracy sense, because of his journalism, for the last, I'd say almost more than 20 years. So as a result, we never really went up there. I have family roots in Shandong and Guangzhou, and it's actually quite it's actually one thing that I do want to go to one day. I know that calling for my father's release and stuff really makes it sort of prohibitive for me, but yeah, it's definitely a place I want to go to one day. But I haven't seen the relatives from my father's side or from my mother's side, and so as a result, I don't really have anybody to contact in China.
But you'd like to go sometime.
Hey, I think everybody, no, I can't speak for every immigrant, but I think a lot of immigrants always, yeah, I mean, I guess in the context in Hong Kong would be that I guess my father was a refugee in Hong Kong, and I think there's always for me at least, for the next generation, there's always a curiosity maybe
about where he came from and what those roots are, that you can see
that means
for yourself. Yeah.
Well, obviously Hong Kong's home, for me, Hong Kong's home. But at least like a curiosity thing, just like
so what are the differences? I haven't been to China, I haven't been to Hong Kong, I haven't been to Taiwan. What are the differences between Hong Kong? You've lived in, you're a native of Hong Kong. You obviously love Hong Kong, and your dad did as well. And now you're in Taipei. What's the difference between Hong Kong and Taiwan? What differences are there that you see? I mean, is it something is palpable on the street? Is there nervousness in Taiwan now about a possible Chinese invasion? That a lot of people are talking about this. What is the vibe in Taiwan these days?
So obviously elections are coming up in the next in January, so very soon. Is that fear of war I don't think so. If you speak to a lot of Taiwanese people, they always tell you that look, that China's been threatening to attack for a very long time, and I think they see it as a they see it the same way as they see earthquakes, I guess.
Say that again, please. They see it the same way
As they see earthquakes. So Taiwan has very bad earthquakes,
oh, okay.
And sometimes it can be existential in the sense that if you have a very bad earthquake and you're in a building, that's it.
Right.
They had one, I think, in the early 2000s in Taichung, and that killed a lot of people. You know, an incredibly unfortunate event, a horrible event. But they see it as something that is out of their control, and if it happens, then you know, obviously it'll be horrible for everyone. But if it doesn't, then life goes on. So there's a attitude like that. From my understanding, there's attitude like that. And it's different to Hong Kong in the sense that, well, first of all, this is it's a democratic country. You know, this is a place where there's Han Chinese people and democracy.
Right.
So so yeah, so you know, you should come visit.
But in terms of the culture, is it do you
Yeah.
feel a difference in like on the street? You see differences in the food, or the obviously the democracy is different, but how does it manifest itself? How would you describe it? If I was obviously as a gringo, a guy in Texas, you know, asking, well, explain the difference between Hong Kong and Taiwan.
So it's incredibly different. I mean, even the legal. I mean, this is, you know, if we're talking about pre national security law Hong Kong. Actually, surprisingly enough, for many years, because Hong Kong, so Taiwan had the White Terror before, you know, before true democracy, when it was basically under martial law. Again, I don't understand Taiwanese politics that well. So Hong Kong was actually more free than Taiwan at some point. The Hong Kong, the Taiwanese legal system is different from the Hong Kong legal system as well. Hong Kong is common law. I think the Taiwanese is much more civil law. Yeah, I mean, it's such a broad question. I'm trying to think if there's any palpable, very clear examples of how they are different. But it's a completely different place. I mean, it's very obvious, but it's a completely different place, and even in the culture, is completely different. Hong Kong obviously is a city of migrants. It's a lot of people who left China, escaped China, and wanted a better life in Hong Kong. While Taiwan, it's a bit of both. The KMT came, and they were really seen as the people who instituted White Terror. Well, they did institute White Terror, but there were also local Chinese. So I think it's a very young and new democracy. You know, in the context of the world, and I think there is a real there's a real pursuit for a very clear national identity. I think if you asked most Taiwanese people, they'll tell you that they're not Chinese, they're Taiwanese.
And I just looked it up. These are things I didn't know until, you know, obviously that's one of the reasons I like my job. I'm learning all the time. So the population of Taiwan is 23, almost 24 million. Population of Hong Kong's about 7 million, 8 million, something like that, if I'm memory serves. So it seems like so let's talk about US versus China. And you were here in the US, obviously, so you're familiar with the US. As I look at it, as obviously armchair, you know, an analyst here, it seems like China invading Taiwan would be just a terrible idea, right? It would cause, you know, all multiple cascading effects economically and sabotage the Taiwanese economy, sabotage the Chinese economy. It seems like just a very bad idea, but you know, there's still, you know, the speculation raging. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal just the other day about this very thing, saying, oh, you think things are bad now with the war in Israel, with the war in Ukraine? Well, if China invades Taiwan, then things really go haywire. But it seems like what you're saying is that the people in Taiwan they don't really think about it that much. Like, well, we can't do anything about that. We're not going to focus on that. We're going to prepare, but we've got your big business of manufacturing. There's the business of making things happening. So it's not that's not what dominates the politics or even the daily discourse. Is that what I'm hearing
Oh,
you say?
um, again, I'm no expert in this, but
But you have lived there now,
it
what, 3 years,
I,
right?
I,
You've been
I have lived there. Yeah, it does. It definitely does. It does dominate during election
that
time.
this concern
So
of the potential for war or invasion.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So candidates will run on platforms saying that do you want so and so to win? If so and so wins, then China will invade, or like it's sort of like it's sort of a fear mongering.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry, what was the question?
No, that's fine. But yeah,
Uh,
I would expect it would be an issue that it would be, common every day, right? That people are thinking about this possibility because this is such a dire, outcome.
yeah, yeah.
And China is doing a lot of saber rattling in the South China Sea and the 9-dash map, and these, its claims on territory in the region are ongoing. So, but it's as looking at it from a distance, it just seems incredibly complicated, incredibly dangerous if this were to happen. But also, you were forced to go to Taiwan, right? You didn't really I mean, I'm hearing you say it. You love Hong Kong. You'd rather be in Hong Kong, but Taiwan is where you had to go because otherwise you might have ended up in prison as well. Is that fair to say, or was that a fear
So
of
I
your
guess
father?
what no, actually, I came to Taiwan because we had business here. I didn't know if Dad was going to. I was still in quarantine actually when someone knocked on my door at 5 in the morning, telling me that Dad was arrested. So it wasn't. It was for work. I actually came here for work. Yeah, so it was actually quite lucky of me because 7 days after Dad was taken away. So yeah, I
So
mean,
you're quarantined for COVID then? Was that
yeah,
correct?
exactly. Sorry, yeah,
Okay.
it was.
All
I
right.
was quarantined for COVID. It was 2020.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I mean, actually, that's one of the things against the backdrop of COVID. A lot of which obviously was a horrible, huge, enormous tragedy. Hong Kong used that tragedy as cover for a lot of these changes in their legal system. I mean,
And the
I say changes is more of a
and
disruption.
the crackdown. So
Exactly.
I guess that's right. So the national security law was implemented in June or July of 2020 then. So this was right
Around that
around
time, yeah.
the time of the lockdown. So that the
Yeah.
COVID and the national security law kind of came together then.
Yeah, yeah.
Interesting. I didn't hadn't thought about that.
Where it was what they used to stop a lot of the protests.
That the COVID
Yeah,
was used as a way to justify the.
as a weapon. Yeah,
Okay,
well,
well,
weapon in both
I have
senses.
to ask this because I've had Alina Chan on the podcast and Matt Ridley, and we've just talked about COVID. This doesn't have anything to do with your dad. Do you think it was a lab leak? I mean, there's a when you look at
Yeah, yeah,
what is. I mean, we've talked about truth in government, right? And what
yeah, yeah,
and what has happened, right? And
yeah, yeah.
the evidence certainly appears to indicate lab leak, which Matt Ridley and Alina Chan, a marvelous book they wrote called Viral. I've had both of them on the podcast. Does that make sense to you that it would have been a lab leak out of China?
I, I, I don't know. I'd have to read the
Okay.
book, and
No.
even then, I think I'd know no less than your two guests. I don't know. All I know is that the Hong Kong government took full advantage of it once
Right. Well,
it happened.
that's why, I mean, it's not like,
Yeah,
oh, well, they released the virus to help, with the crackdown,
yeah, no, exactly. Yeah,
but it is interesting that it would be coincident, right? That those issues that the virus and the spread of COVID would be helpful in some ways to the Chinese government in terms of cracking down on
mm.
the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong. And it's just occurring to me now. I'm just, spitballing
Yeah,
here,
yeah.
but
I think I think they saw a window. I think they saw a window because Hong Kong obviously we had the protest, and as you mentioned, there was a protest with like 2 million people
right.
going there, which is
In the streets
30% of the
in
population.
2019, right? And
Yeah, in
that was
2019, exactly.
Right. And
Yeah,
the
yeah.
the virus is discovered in November of 2019 and then really goes viral
yeah,
in January, February, March of 2020. I know these because that was when my book came out, was March of 2020. And right
right,
when
right.
I remember it very well because you remember dates of when your kids are born. I
Yeah,
remember my book was coming out.
yeah.
Okay, so let's move on. So you're in Taiwan.
Mm,
We contact each other first on WhatsApp, which is secure.
mm.
Are you being monitored by the Chinese government?
Um, well, I mean, I would hope not. And I guess that's also the thing about Taiwan that's pretty good. To be honest, I feel relatively safe in Taiwan.
Mm,
But again, because like I mentioned before, it's a zero or one thing, right? It's pretty binary. Either life in Taiwan is great, which is what it is now, um, or there's that existential threat, which is China attacking. Um, so I don't think I'm monitored in Taiwan. I would hope not,
but
at least not by the
do you
Chinese
take
government.
precautions? I asked because when I interviewed Matt and Alina Chan, particularly when they
Mm,
were writing their book, they were very careful, right? They always
mm,
were communicating on secure channels. Do
mm.
you take those kinds of steps? What do you do? Do you think about this and how you do communications? Do you use
Yeah,
WhatsApp or secure protocols? What do you think about that, or how do you manage your own communications?
yeah. So I use Signal to
Uh-huh.
communicate.
Right.
Um, there's a lot of sort of digital hygiene that actually I think it's quite important for most people to know, just because even if your opponent, even if the person that you're angering is not China, it's still very easy actually well, relatively easy for people to access your information.
Hmm.
Like, so it's like, two-factor authentication, a lot of these things that can be done to make it a tad bit harder. This I had a briefing on this. So basic hygiene.
Yeah.
Um, but from my understanding, speaking to people who know, is that in the end, if they wanted to tap your devices, there are ways to do it.
Sure.
Um, all you do with the basic hygiene is that you protect yourself against a part of that.
Right. So back to your dad, we've covered a lot of different things, and I'm not trying to
Mm,
be, I'm as you can tell, I'm easily distracted, but I think, I want to get back to your father and his imprisonment. So he was arrested when he's now 75 or 76. So
yeah,
if he
he's almost 76 now.
so he would be, when he's released, if this 5 years 9 months sentence is carried out, he will be 81 or 82 then when he's released, if um in rough terms, I think.
Uh, yeah, I think he's already served a year of that sentence. Well, I say already, like it's completely unjustly imprisoned. So yeah, he'd be like 79, 80.
Hmm.
I mean, again, at his age, I think every single day um, in prison, he risks his life. So
So and I don't ask this with any joy, but do you despair that, I mean, you have to have hope about this because you're working to try and get him freed, but
mm,
are there days when you just think this isn't going to work out, or are there days when you have to be optimistic, right? I guess, let me put it this way: what keeps you optimistic? What drives your hopefulness that this will happen, that your father will be released?
there's a I saw this interview of him in 1996. I think it was before the handover, and I think it was actually in the BBC archives. And he's asked if he wants to stay in Hong Kong. Um, knowing that he has this pro-democracy newspaper, knowing that the government, uh, the Chinese government, doesn't like him that much, knowing that he might be arrested even in 1997, and he tears up and he smiles and he says, "That's my home, unless my life is threatened, I'm going to stay here." And I think at that point he knew that he was fully committed to it. And it's the same with me. I think, like my father, I know that I'm doing the right thing, and it's emotionally it's a roller coaster. As you mentioned, you never really know what's going to happen to him and whatnot. But I do it with a clean conscience, and it is the right thing, and it's also the necessary thing. So I keep charging ahead until my father's released. I'm not going to stop.
Well, I can, yeah, I can only imagine. I mean, my father's been dead now 30 years, but I think about him all the time and think, oh, what would I want to talk to him about? Or sports. He's a big Dallas Cowboys fan, right? He loves
Right,
football,
right.
right? So what are
Yeah,
those
of course.
things
Yeah.
that you'd want to reconnect with him about? And so maybe it be, French food or something like the things that you used to talk about, right? So we just have a few minutes left, Seb, and I really appreciate your time. My guest again is Seb Lai. He's in Taiwan. His father, Jimmy Lai, is a pro-democracy leader who is imprisoned. He's in Stanley prison in Hong Kong for publishing, for being a publisher, for being in the free press and having the audacity to speak truth to power. And I recommend highly that you watch The Hong Konger, the film made by the Acton Institute. So just a couple more questions, Seb, because I like to keep my podcast right about an hour and we're getting close. What are you reading? What books are you, what are the things that you are reading now? You read fiction, nonfiction? What do you read, or do you have time for reading?
Yeah, at the moment, I'm reading Sam Walton's autobiography.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I really, really enjoy it.
Founder of Walmart.
Exactly, the founder of Walmart, and I'm almost done with the book actually. But it chronicles his life and how he started at Walmart and the principles that he used. Fascinating. I mean, for me at least, because I'm very interested in business and whatnot. So it's incredibly fascinating book. And it's almost like having this guy speak to you. So
really,
I think it's a great book. Yeah.
So any other books? Any of the ones that I don't know what I can look that one up, but Sam Walton's autobiography. What else?
I'm giving Road to Serfdom a crack as well. So I've been I started reading it, but I got sort of the attention got taken away by the Sam Walton book. But the Road to Serfdom is a very special book for I guess my family, but for my father, because it's the book that really I think he was given it when he was 27, 28. And well, I mean, but anyway, when he was in New York, I think in his 20s. He says that it changed his life. And he read it. I think he read it. Well, I mean, he read it like 12, 15 times because he didn't understand it.
This is the famous book by Frederick Hayek.
Exactly. Yeah.
On capitalism and free markets and free people. I have one more question, but I wanted to just back up because I think I can answer that. I've started asking this question about who your heroes are, who you admire, and obviously your father is one of them. He's an inspirational guy. But are there other people that you think about that you think heroic that you admire in public life or in your own life today?
There's a lot of, as you mentioned, my father is my hero. But I think in different aspects of my life, you have different people that you look up to. So, for example, I do some investing for my family office, and a person that I look up to tremendously in that aspect is a man like Warren Buffett, like Charlie Munger. In campaigning, there's a lot of people that I look up to. People like Nelson Mandela, Václav Havel. I think that's the benefit of books. I'm really happy that you asked that question because it really is that it's an opportunity that it's almost like you have these people, you could see these people's lives, and in the example of Sam Walton, for example, it's like that person is speaking directly to you, and so as a result, I've then it's, obviously everybody knows Walmart, but you find out his story, and then you find out that actually this is someone that is incredible, and so that's also someone I look up to now in the context of business.
Sure. So last question, Seb, what gives you hope?
I think I think one's ability to affect one's fate. I mean, my father was, my father came to Hong Kong when he was 12, and started from scratch, started from nothing. He worked at a glove factory, and the day he landed, because he had to pay for his shipping fees, and he still has these sort of physical memories from that. He's, one of his fingers partially cut off because he got stuck in a machine. One of these years he can't really hear out of because of the working conditions. And through it all, he always tells me stories about those times as a very happy thing. And obviously, objectively, it was a very hard time. And for him, it was always very happy. For him, it wasn't like he started enjoying life once he had money. He always enjoyed life. He always enjoyed life because he always knew that, well, in Hong Kong, in the context of Hong Kong, he always had these freedoms that he fell in love with. But I think even in China, I think he was always very happy. So I think using my father as a blueprint for that it really is one's ability to affect one's life. That gives me hope. And in this context, I hope I could also affect my father's life and see him released. And that gives me a lot of hope.
That's a good place to stop. So that is where we will, in fact, stop. Seb, thanks for your time. I'm really pleased to reconnect, and I was really impressed when I heard you speak back in August in Colorado at the conference. My guest again has been Seb Lai. His father, Jimmy Lai, is being imprisoned by the Chinese government for no good reason on trumped-up charges. That, let's be clear, that call a spade. That's what it is, trumped-up charges. You can follow him. You can follow on Substack, support Jimmy Lai, at support Jimmy Lai, freejimmylai.com, and then watch the Hong Konger. You will be glad you did. Seb, it's been a pleasure to reconnect with you. Thanks a million for coming on the
Twitter,
podcast.
On Twitter, sorry.
Oh, where did I say? Yeah. On Twitter.
Substack. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm getting my social media on Twitter at support Jimmy Lai. And then I gave you the other URLs, so you have those. So, Seb, thanks a million for coming on the podcast. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers. And to all of you out in podcast land, tune into the next episode of the Power Hungry Podcast. Until then, see you.